Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gary Ripka. Today, we'll be going over critical thinking tools and how to apply them in critical thinking situations within our classroom. The purpose of this lesson today is to explore what critical thinking is and why it is necessary. Also, to learn to ask yourself whether you must believe what you hear and see, and to introduce tools to help you become a better critical thinker. Critical thinking is defined many ways, and we're going to discuss some of them throughout this course. The purpose for learning about critical and creative thinking is to enable instructors to help their students develop the habit of being creative in their work while also exercising critical thinking skills with respect to adult teaching and learning. Many people have defined critical thinking not in terms of what it is, but rather in terms of its characteristics and what critical thinkers do. Critical thinkers are aware of their surroundings. They are aware of what they know and what they don't know, and realize that their own way of thinking can often fool them. As a result, critical thinkers are self-reflective and defer judgment. They do not jump to conclusions, but rather take time to ask questions, consider different perspectives, ask what is not being considered that should be, and reflect on how their own values may impact their view of the world. Critical thinkers consider various frameworks when thinking about problems. Frameworks force us to consider alternative perspectives that they perhaps would have overlooked. Critical thinkers are aware that their own thinking may include assumptions, which are often hidden. They are aware that they may make assumptions about something without realizing they are doing so. As a result, they try to challenge all assumptions. When they challenge assumptions and find them to be faulty, it helps them gain better insight into their nature of the world around them. So what is critical thinking? I know I just gave you a long rundown of kind of definitions of what people believe critical thinking is, but in your own words, class, what is critical thinking? Okay, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your answer. You, yes. Okay, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, so what you're saying is that critical thinking involves questioning what is seen, heard, read, or experienced. It ensures that the person is engaged in the learning process, critically considering information of practical skills. Great job. Yeah, you definitely hit that answer right on the head. Now, what is creative thinking? Take a second and think about that. What is creative thinking to you? Okay, any answers? You in the back. Okay, thank you. Awesome, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? You, yeah, right here. Yes, exactly. Yes, in case y'all didn't hear what she said that creative thinking is, creativity is largely an attitude. To become more creative, we must be willing to make unusual connections that defy conventions. So now we talked about critical thinking. Does anybody know what groupthink mitigation is? Can anybody tell me what they think, in their own words, what groupthink mitigation is? Okay, so groupthink mitigation is the application of various tools in order to prevent or minimize groupthink when a group of people are unable to separate their own perspectives from those of the rest of the group, and sometimes arrive at decisions or conclusions not favored by any of the individual members of the group. Okay, so what does that mean, right? So what groupthink mitigation is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to break away from people's social norms, the way people think, the way people react to a situation or a question that has kind of been the way we've been brought up and raised and taught. It has a lot to do with how we think and how we would react to situations that are proposed to us, right? So we have to be able to mitigate that through groupthink mitigation. So some groupthink mitigation tools, which allows us to create an environment for divergent thought and mitigate the possibility of an individual student being able to dominate or take over a classroom discussion. All right, so that's one of the big things, is that when we're trying to hold a classroom discussion or get a group to think together, you have to watch out for that person who's going to try to take over and really dominate the course or dominate the lesson and want to kind of be the voice of the people. Because what happens in that situation is once someone kind of sets the tone that that's who they are, it will then cause people within the classroom itself to kind of settle down and not want to answer because they think, oh, well, so-and-so is already going to answer this for me, right? So that's something you have to watch out for is that groupthink mitigation, because if you don't put a stop to it early, then the lesson and the learning will definitely hinder from it, because no one's really wanting to chime in or anything like that, right? All right, awesome. So now we're talking about some mental models and framing, right? Does anybody know what framing is? Can anybody tell me what framing is? So framing is the use of mental structures that simplify and guide our understanding of a complex reality. All right, so like, wow, that's a whole lot of big words, right? What all does that mean exactly to me? I don't get what framing is. So here's a great example of framing, right? So I'm gonna turn this on real fast. So framing. The simple picture here, we see a dark pathway with some lights going down it, right? And I think you can see a jogger way in the back. So what you can do here with this is framing exercise is you can actually ask your class, take 5 minutes and write down what you see, what you think, what this picture is telling you, right? There's a lot going on, very complex picture, but you're trying to hone it in to one specific thing. You want someone to say, what's the one thing that stood out to you? That's called framing, right? Okay, so everybody real fast, take a couple minutes and write down what you think you see in this picture. Okay, awesome. So everybody has something that written down. Does anybody care to share what they see? Okay, yeah. All right, you see somebody running down the path trying to get some exercise in. Okay. You see, okay, you see definitely a dark long pathway. Safety doesn't look very safe out there. I really appreciate that. So what we did there was a quick framing exercise, right? So framing is defined in a number of different ways and for different reasons. In psychology, the framing effect is an example of cognitive bias. People react to a particular choice in different ways, depending on how it is presented. For example, they may view a choice as either a loss or as a gain. Another definition relates to the agenda-setting tradition, but expands on it by focusing on the essence of the issue at hand rather than on a particular topic. The basis of framing theory is that the media focuses attention on certain events and then places them within a field of meaning. Frame dependency means that people behave in a manner that depends on the way what their decision problems are framed. They also use framing to solve problems they face. In those cases, framing is a cognitive heuristic and technique for solving problems, in which people tend to reach conclusions based on the framework within a problem or situation was presented. But we know that people do not always do this, and one common reason is the framing effect. The framing effect can make us respond differently to identical circumstances by changing the framing of those circumstances by focusing our attention on particular aspects of a situation. All right, so everybody kind of have an idea now what framing is? Okay, good. So now we go into another way to help with critical thinking within a classroom is mental models, right? So mental models are tools we unknowingly create to replicate how we believe the world actually works. We use them to simplify our daily lives. So one way that we can do with mental models is we create better questions, right? To help spark that critical thinking, right? We have to figure out how to ask questions, right? You don't always want to ask yes or no, right? Because you ask yes or no questions, what do you get? Yes or no answers. Not really people open up to talking, right? So we have to figure out how to ask better questions. So some great ways to ask better questions are employ why, how, what at the start of the question to get the student to answer in a deeper matter. For instance, what can equal results, how can equal means, and why can equal a deeper meaning or a purpose. We can also do what's called turning it on its head. We can also turn the question on its head. What could stop Russia from being great? This may help students view it from a different perspective, right? So it's just that kind of quick question, how do you kind of flip it, right? Like instead of saying, why is something great? What could stop them from being great? You see what I'm saying? It kind of helps open up their mind to even more thinking, okay? Another great way to create better questions is should versus could, right? So you can say, how should something be great versus how could something be great? If you want one answer, employ should. But if you want more divergent answers, go with could. It all depends on the context of the question. Other considerations when creating better questions is you want to change the positions of the words. We want to consider Bloom's taxonomy when we are creating our questions to revisit the cognitive level of learning. Also, we want to take a break, right? We want to set aside time to write down our questions. That way we write our questions down and we can read them out and say, hey, does this question make sense? Is this question how I'm wanting it to come across, right? So we have to do our questions and come up with them before we come up with our class, right? You don't want to be up there on the instructing and kind of come up with questions on the fly because you'll tend to not generate the best type of questions for your class. So we had talked about that, and we had talked about some ways to create better questions, and we had also talked a little bit earlier about group think mitigation, right? Y'all remember us talking about that? Okay, awesome. And we kind of talked about what group think was and how it kind of what it can do. So some more symptoms of group think is overestimation of the group's power and vulnerability and morality. It's self-censorship by individuals in a group and an inclination for some individuals to be quiet or not to contribute. Remember we talked about that one person who's going to stand up and say, hey, I'm answering all these questions, and then everyone else kind of sits back and like, oh, yep, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to answer, I'm not going to reply because so-and-so has taken over this class, right? So now we've gone over that. We've gone over the ways to talk about critical thinking, right? So why is critical thinking important? Yes. Okay, you believe critical thinking is important because it allows the students to open up their framework of mind, and it allows for more thought, in-depth question or answering and thinking to take place in the class. Perfect. Yeah, I really like that answer. Okay, so what are some other things that we think is important with critical thinking and why we need to be really, really good at generating critical thinking scenarios? Yes. Okay, so you're saying that we have to pre-position our questions. We have to think about our questions first before we go into a class. That way we know we're asking the right questions to open up that full level of critical thinking within our students. Okay, perfect. And class, what's something that we need to watch out for when we are going into critical thinking exercises or when we're trying to open up our classroom to critical thinking? Anybody? In the back, what do you have? You want to look out for group think mitigation, okay? And what in group think mitigation do you want to look out for? Okay, so you want to look out for that person who kind of bullies the class, right? Who takes over the class and who just kind of feels they have to answer everything and they have an answer for everything. Now, why do we want to look out for that person? And why do we want to try to reduce that or minimize groupthink as much as possible? Correct, exactly. Just like you just said, what it does is if we're able to reduce and minimize it, it then opens up the classroom for everybody to be involved, right? Because after all, we are a class, we're all learning together, right? So we don't want one person to take over the entire way. Awesome, yeah, y'all nailed it. Well, class, I really appreciate y'all's time today on this class on applying critical thinking and its importance as well as minimizing groupthink mitigation within your classroom of learning in your environments that you'll be teaching in. Thank y'all, you'll have a great day. Again, my name is Gary Ripka. I appreciate your time.